Hello there, it's Greg Burdine. I'm looking at Route 66, Journey Through the Bible. Today is a challenging day. Every now and then we get 4 chapters that we're supposed to read. Sometimes the chapters are shorter, but you got 4 chapters to read in Deuteronomy chapter 6 through 9. So just sit down and read them. It's a lot of good stuff in Deuteronomy, a lot of teaching. Deuteronomy is a teaching book. So let's get right to it. Grab your Bible and let's see what God has for us today. In these chapters, Moses is reminding the people, the Israelites, and I think that's important. Um, when you go to church and you hear the preacher preach, a lot of times the preacher preaches something that you've already heard, a subject that you've already heard, or a story you've already heard, and it's always it's not exactly the same. But you know what? I think we need to be reminded of the truths, and that's what's important. And we go, you know what? Yeah, I'm glad I was reminded of that. Moses reminded the people the importance of loving and obeying God. In Deuteronomy 6, he teaches them to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. Jesus reiterates this in the New Testament, saying this is the first and great commandment. And he says, not only are we supposed to do that, I love chapter 6. Take your time with chapter 6. Because he says we're not only supposed to love God, but we are supposed to pass this down to our children. And he actually gives some specific ways that the Israelites could pass God's commands and loving God down to the children. So it's kind of interesting to try to find contemporary ways that we can do that. So that's Deuteronomy chapter 6. Deuteronomy 7 is a warning the people to stay away from the bad influences of the other nations that are around them. We are in the world, but we're not to be of the world. I heard somebody say it like this. A boat is supposed to go in the water, but if the water gets in the boat, you're in trouble. And so the worldly influences, by worldly, I don't mean just, stuff out there. I mean influences to go against God, to disobey God, to not put God first in your life. We are easily influenced by the social people that are around us. Be careful that we are not entangled by the people that are around us, just like he encouraged them. They were to keep themselves pure for God. Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses reminds them and tells them to remember how God cared for them in the wilderness. He made them successful. They became successful. And the same God that took care of them for the past 40 years, and even before that in Egypt, is going to take care of them in the promised land. And I think it's good for us to remember, if God could get us through that, he can get us through this. And let's do the same thing. God has gotten you through a lot of stuff. He really has. And you may be coming up with something that's a little bit unique or a little bit fearful, but you know what? The same God who brought you through the one problem, he's going to get you through the next one. Deuteronomy chapter 9, Moses explains that the Israelites are in the promised land, not because they were good, but because of God's promise and God's mercy. And he warns them, stay humble, stay obedient. You're no better than anybody else. You're here because I love you, and you love me. So let's just move on. So that's it. What are some lessons? Well, let's just do some quick ones here. Number one, love and obey God. That's the biggest lesson of life. Love God with all your heart and do what he says. Number two, teach other people. It is not fair that God has taught you some great lessons and you're not teaching somebody else. With Facebook and all the things, you can throw stuff out for people to learn. You may not know how far it goes, kind of like the sower that sowed the seed. You may not know where it lands, but find somebody to teach. Your children, your grandchildren, write letters, cards, emails, texts. Teach a Sunday school class. Teach a group of people. Teach young people. Man, you can mold them and maybe they can miss some of the mistakes that we've made. So teach other people. Number three, avoid bad influence. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people that were doing what God wanted them to do, and then they got involved in something, usually somebody else. It wasn't intentional, but they began to drift. We need to be careful of the drift, and it happens when we're influenced by other people, whether they be people that we actually encounter, like neighbors and people at work or people at our school system or something like that, or whether it be online influences. Be careful of bad influences. So those are some good lessons as you read today's reading. God bless you. Have a good time reading